Welcome back to Knowledge is Kings, guys. I am Kings, and Thanksgiving is coming up soon, so I thought it might be cool to make a couple of candle holders to dress up the dinner table a bit. And I suppose I can show you guys how to do it too, I guess. Let's get to it. So I start by cutting some scrap pieces I had left over from another project, which is why they all have an angle cut on one side. I'll rip that off in just a second here. I'm using cherry, black walnut, maple, and ash for this project. Once they are cut to length, I take them over to the table saw to rip them down to their rough width. Then I glue them all together using my glue roller to spread the glue. You can see that all the pieces are the same thickness, but if you wanted to make this, you could make some pieces thinner or thicker to make it a little more fancy. Also, you could just use one large piece of the same wood so you wouldn't have to glue anything together. Once I have the glue spread, I just use 3 small clamps to squeeze it all together. I clean up glue squeeze out and what got on my table with plain water. While that glue sets up, I rip a piece of ash on the table saw for the stand of the tea candle holders. I flip it over to get a nice edge on the other edge as well. Then I cut the stand pieces to their final lengths. I set up a couple of stops on my miter sled that I made in a different video to cut the notches into the stand pieces. I make multiple passes to cut out the grooves, then readjust the stops for the next section, repeating this process until all 6 notches are cut. Then I lower the height of the blade and center it on what will be a half lap joint in the bottom of the short pieces. When I make the cuts for the long center pieces, I need to keep them upside down and raise the blade so it removes the other half of the half lap joint. I test the notch with a 1/4 inch aluminum spacer. It's time to cut all the ash pieces in half. I set the rip fence just over a 1/4 inch away from the blade. I'd rather have the pieces a little thicker because I can always sand them down if they are too thick. I make the cuts in 2 passes since the pieces are so small and I don't want to get my hands or the push stick too close to the blade where it might grab it and pull it in. Once the pieces are cut into 1/4 inch strips, I now have enough to make 2 candle holders. I just test fit them together first before I sand them down a bit. The middle pieces on both are just a little tight, so I will sand those down a bit more to make them fit. Once I have them all sanded down and fitting, it's time to remove the clamps on the first piece. I take it over the table saw and rip it to get one flat square side and then flip it over 180 degrees to make that side flat as well. Then I move the fence so that I rip off the same amount of either side from the cherry center. Then I move the fence over a tiny bit and make one pass, turn the piece 90 degrees and make another pass. This makes the block perfectly square. I test fit the block in the holder to make sure it's not too big for the slots I made previously. Looks good, so I'll cut off one end at the miter saw just to get a flat square end. I use a straight edge to find the center, marking corner to corner. Then I set a compass to the distance from one corner to the center mark and mark that arch at each corner. I used a small speed square to connect those points to make the octagon that I was going for. I set the table saw to 45 degrees and align the angle I just made with the blade and make the cut. I turn the piece 90 degrees and make another cut and then repeat that 2 more times. Then it's back to the miter sled to cut the long block down into its final pieces. I use a straight edge, lining up the corners again to find the center of each piece. I use a Forstner bit in my drill press to cut out the socket for the candle to rest. I am using a 1 5/8 inch bit, but a 1 9/16 inch bit would have been better, but I didn't have one. I'm using a clamp to hold the pieces, 1 because they are small, and 2 because when you drill into end grain like this, the bit really wants to grab the piece and fling it across the room. I test fit the pieces into the stand, and I noticed the top of the candle holder is flush with the top of the stand, and it doesn't really look that cool. I think it would look nicer if the candle holder is a little bit taller. So I take the candle holder over to the wood stretcher and put, I'm just kidding. I take the stand pieces over the table saw and rip a little off of them. That looks a little nicer to me. I sanded all the pieces, and now it's time to glue all the pieces together. I used CA glue and accelerator. Once they are glued together, it's time for finish. I use a two-part finish from Renner, sprayed from my HVLP, high volume, low pressure gun. Now let's light these babies. Ooh, ah. So I tried moving them in different orientations to see if I could get any cool, unique, innovative designs. Yeah, that didn't happen. Oh well. That's it for today's project. Don't forget to like this video as it really helps out the channel, and subscribe so you can be entered into our current drawing. Details are in the description below. Also, let me know what project you'd like to see me do in the future. And I'll see you in the next one. Oh, I like that!